tonight to 1 Corinthians chapter number 4, because that's where we have arrived. And tonight, I predict, by looking at the clock and my notes, that we are going to get out significantly earlier than usual. I've not tried to do that for any reason, and who knows, that could change, but just looking at what we are going to cover tonight, I'm not going to try to belabor it. So before we look at 1 Corinthians 4, let me review what we have done. I will review the basics of day one. Tonight is lesson number 34, Bible study number 34. And I'm going to go back to the beginning and just scan over the basics. We're going to go into chapter 3 in a little more detail of review because we're wrapping that up. And then we're going to look at chapter number 4. Got my words wrong tonight. Chapter number 4 tonight. So, by way of review, first of all, and all we'll do on that first page is read. There are no blanks there, and there's no slides on the screen. It's all just reading what is there. Introduction to 1 Corinthians 4, and here's the review. Paul started the church in Corinth on his second missionary journey, as recorded in Acts 18, 1 through 8, around 52 A.D. Now, I don't expect that, every believer is going to be an expert on Paul's missionary journeys. I am no expert on Paul's missionary journeys. But what would help you is to be familiar with the basics of what he accomplished on each of those three journeys. It'll give you a timeline of his life. Listen, after the life of Jesus in the New Testament, the timeline of Paul's life is pretty much the core timeline of what's going on in the New Testament. Now, the New Testament is not as much a historical record as the Old Testament is. It's more doctrine than it is history. Still, when I think of church in Rome, church in Corinth, churches in Galatia, church in Ephesus, all the way down, I want to have some idea of when it was established, how it was established, and so forth. So, he started the church in Corinth on his second missionary journey, as recorded in Acts 18, 1 through 8, around 52 A.D. The book of 1 Corinthians was penned by the Apostle Paul on his third missionary journey between 57 and 59 A.D. And 1 Corinthians is the largest of Paul's epistles. The theme of 1 Corinthians is correcting problems in the church. And the key verse, the verse that sort of sums it all up, is chapter 3 and verse 3. For ye are yet carnal, for whereas there is among you envying and strife and divisions, are ye not carnal and walk as men? The simple outline of 1 Corinthians, and I've encouraged you to nail down a simple outline as much as you can for every book of the Bible, just to give you an overview. And so the simple outline of 1 Corinthians is chapters 1 through 4, preparing for correction. Chapters 5 through 15, details of correction. And then chapter 16, surviving correction. So here we are, week number 34, and we're still looking at preparing for correction. Paul is preparing these people to receive the spanking that he's about to give them. All right? And in that, we looked at chapter 1, the foolishness of preaching. Jared, I'm going to take this one here. I should have done already, but I forgot. The foolishness of preaching. And you remember, Paul is not in that chapter belittling preaching. He is showing the people God has not chosen to use worldly philosophy, He has not chosen to use the intelligence community. He has not chosen to use man's talents or skills. God has chosen to bring the message to this world, the message of Jesus Christ, through the foolishness of preaching. Chapter 2, he talks about the source of truth. How did God's truth get from God to man? How did the words of God get from the heart of God into that book that you have on your lap? And 1 Corinthians chapter 2 goes a long way in explaining that. And then chapter 3, which we just finished last week, the carnality of glorying in man. And that one I am going to review section by section. You see it there in front of you. The key verse of chapter 3 is verse number 21. In verses 1 through 4, he makes the case, ye are yet carnal. You're still living in the flesh. You're not walking in the Spirit. You're walking in the flesh. Verses 5 through 11, he makes the point, we are laborers together with God. All under this heading of the carnality of glorying man. We're laborers together with God. Don't get impressed with Paul is saying one of my teammates, because we're all laboring together with God. Then, verses 12 through 15, every man's work shall be made manifest. Talking about the judgment seat of Christ. Verses 16 and 17, ye are the temple of God. And in this case, it's not so much talking about, so don't smoke. In this case, it's talking more about, ye are the temple of God. You are the precious edifice, the precious project that Peter and Apollos and I and all of our co-workers are working on. So, this is not a game. You, and by the way, both you personally and your church, it's very important that we, as we're going to stand before God, it's very important that we get this right, because you are the temple of God. We are working on a precious project. So do not trivialize it by dividing it into clubs, the Paul Club, the Apollos Club, the Peter Club, the Jesus Club. That's what they were doing. Don't trivialize the work. You are the temple, the building of God, your life and the church that you belong to. And then verses 18 through 23, let no man glory in man. Now, let's look at chapter number 4, all on the back page, and give you a preview of chapter 4. The title of chapter 4 is The Meek Request of the Founding Pastor. Who's the founding pastor? Paul is. And Paul very meekly makes a request of them. And that request is found in the key verse, which is verse 16. So here's both the key verse and the meek request of the founding pastor. Verse 16, wherefore I beseech you, be ye followers of me. Now that sounds like it goes contrary to what he's already been trying to beat into their heads. Don't get all wrapped up in men. Okay, so but now he's coming back to a matter of principle. The principle being, I introduced you to Christ. I laid the foundation of your church. So, if there's any area where Peter and I may have a difference of philosophy, and listen, you take any two preachers in the history of the New Testament church, they're going to have different philosophies. It may not be on big things, but different is different. And one body of believers, big or small, will only thrive if they follow one central philosophy. Now, preachers don't get to have unscriptural philosophies. That's not the point. But you've all been associated with other ministries, other churches, other preachers where you'd say, well, they were good people, but they did this particular thing a little bit different. Not right or wrong, just did it a little bit different. Not only are there different philosophies, there are different strategies and game plans. Okay, we have a strategy in our church. It's not right or wrong. It's just what I believe the Lord has led me to do. That in Sunday school, we go through the stories of the Bible every 2 years. That's not a right thing or a wrong thing. It's just something that we have done, and I believe it has worked. I believe it's what God would have us to do. But it's a strategy for teaching the Bible to our children and to our teenagers and to our adults. So, what Paul is saying when he says, I beseech you, be ye followers of me, he's not saying, would you forget about Peter, forget about Apollos, forget about these other guys that come through, and stick with me. Be loyal to me. This is not a loyalty plea. This is, hey, I want to continue to guide you guys. I want to continue to lead you and direct you. And so here's maybe the phrase that defines it. So that we'll all be on the same page. Would you please focus on what I'm giving you? He's going to get, not only has he written them a long letter here that this is a part of, and so in telling them, be ye followers of me, he's saying, just remember as you read these things, remember who wrote it. The guy who started the church is writing it, so just keep that in mind. But he's going to write them another long letter after they recover from these issues. So see it that way. Don't see it as, I'm the man of God, follow me. Don't see that as, you ought to be loyal to me. I led a lot of you to Christ. He's saying, look, I'm going to lead you to Christ. And since I founded the church, in summary, he's not saying ignore Peter. He's not saying ignore Apollos. He's saying, but when it comes to your core philosophy, stay on track with what I've taught you. So that's the key verse. That's Paul's meek request. Now, verses 1 through 5, he makes the point, and this is where we'll jump into next Wednesday, that we are stewards and God is the judge. A steward is, of course, someone who is put in charge of something that is not his own. He is entrusted. He is the steward of a home or a company. We are stewards. God is the judge. And Paul makes that point in verses 1 through 5. In verses 6 through 8, he repeats in a slightly different context the idea that he presented in chapter 3. Do not think too highly of any man. And then he shows the human side of spiritual leaders in verses 9 through 14 in making the point that God purposefully allows his servants to struggle. Now, there's a slight difference, by the way, between the word purposely and purposefully. Purposely means you did something on purpose. Purposefully means that you did something with a purpose. Slight difference. You might not see it. That's fine. But that's why I went with the word purposefully. God purposefully allows his servants to struggle. And then verses 15 through 29, Paul says, allow me to lead you closer to Christ. So this is where we'll be for the next who knows how many weeks before we jump into chapter 5, where Paul just starts dealing with the specifics of the problems in the church in Corinth. We are nearly 30 minutes earlier than we are, and I don't know why. And I'm not going to make you sit through something that I didn't plan because I think we should be here longer. So I'll tell you this, you can tack this on to tomorrow because tomorrow's the shortest day of the year. So I gave you that. That was it. It was my plan. It was to give you an extra half hour to go to bed a half an hour earlier tonight to tack it on to tomorrow. No, I'm lying. But that good news is we hit bottom tomorrow, and Friday is rebound day. Days start getting longer again. Amen? And it seems like that maybe we've just had more overcast days, but it seems like last week or two I've gone, it's 4:15. Where's the sun? And like they're getting even shorter than they used to be. I don't know. It's climate change. It's climate change doing that. Anyway, let's stand together before we've used up the whole extra half hour. All right? And let's close in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for these